We thank you for staying with us on Checkpoint. A quick reminder that we go all the way up until 11, so lots to discuss. And that story that we have been promising you all evening, focusing on the war against terror, is what we want to focus on now for the remainder of this show. Now, of course, since 2015, the government has been engaging in an anti-terror operation at the expansive Boni forest to flush out Al-Shabaab militants. There's been mixed reactions as to whether that operation has been successful, but a lot of that has been happening behind the scenes. And Francis Ontomwa has, of course, been keeping tabs on that and has done an in-depth report on the same. And he joins me live right here on Checkpoint to tell us more about that. Francis, before we get into your story, talk to us about just the overall and remind our viewers about the very essence of this operation in Boni Forest.
Well, Yvonne, right, you put it very well to our viewers. We are revisiting the subject, the whole subject on terror, specifically looking at violent extremism and radicalization down here in the coast region, which has been synonymous with the region actually in the past couple of months. And therefore, it's a whole huge subject. And just because it's not being reported, just because it's not stealing the headlines as it used to be, is it then to mean that radicalization, violent extremism has actually found closure? It has ended. That is the subject we'll want to have, of course, with my guest here. But by and large, it is something that, of course, continues to make discussions down here in the coast region having suffered some of the worst terror attacks that have happened here in the country. And therefore, this becomes a very relevant subject. And of course, we've seen what is happening at the Boni Forest. That is on the lips of many people right now. The Linda Boni operation, 2 years on, has it achieved what it had set out to achieve? That is the question we'll be putting to our guest here. And of course, try to look at all affairs that have been surrounding this Linda Boni operation. There has been a lot of politicking around it. There has been a lot of issues, of course, trying to assess on whether there is some sort of making ground into really neutering terrorism in that part of the country. Many families, thousands of families, as we will be showing you in our report, are affected by terrorism around that area. And therefore, we will be giving you a general view of this subject, bringing it back to the limelight and really bringing out all the issues surrounding this particular subject and why it is important really to have such discussions, Yvonne.
Yes, that's right. An important conversation to continue to have here. So before we get into that discussion as to the success and the challenges facing this operation, let's take a look at this report that you, Francis Ontomwa, prepared on the operation in Boni Forest.
Monday, the 18th of September 2017, a multi-agency security team centered its focus at an Al-Shabaab makeshift hideout inside the dreaded Boni Forest. Shocking details will follow. Pornographic DVDs, condoms, empty alcohol bottles, and assorted drugs will be fished out. It was quite clear that the Al-Shabaab militant had deserted the camp not so long ago, and in what looked like a rush leaving behind personal effects, including a laptop currently under forensic audit. The seizure provoking the question of validity of the militants' argument of fighting in the name of religion. Just a week ago, a group of women identified 2 Al-Shabaab militants from the police wanted list. Among them are terrorists who had gang raped them. Reports say some women living around the deadly forest have been abducted and held as captives, making them sex slaves in the forest. Assertions supported by some Al-Shabaab returnees who had managed to escape from the group. The obscene discovery has poked holes in the value of the men who claim to fight in the name of God. Since the Operation Linda Boni was initiated in 2015, analysis has been divided regarding its successes and failures. A few weeks ago, Lamu County Commissioner Joseph Kanyiri replaced James Ole Seriani as the man in charge of the operation. Thousands of people have so far been uprooted from their homes, while businesses, public transport and farming grounded to a halt. The dusk to dawn curfew imposed by Acting Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i is still on, but even so, attacks have not subsided. June 28th, 4 policemen, 3 civilian adults and a child were killed in an explosion ignited when a police truck struck a landmine at Mararani area, 15 kilometers west of Kiunga Township in the northeastern part of Lamu, close to the Indian Ocean. On May 31st, 4 administration policemen and an unidentified man in civilian clothes perished when an armored personnel carrier they were traveling in struck an improvised explosive device planted by insurgents at Baure in a volatile section of Lamu. The APC was blown apart according to police sources, which indicated that 2 soldiers from the Baure camp died in a secondary explosion as they responded to the first explosion. Beginning of August, unknown attackers beheaded 9 civilians in a remote village in the western part of Lamu, 3 days after 3 policemen and an insurgent were killed in a militant takeover of the local police station at Pandanguo. One man that has become synonymous with the fight against terror at the Kenyan coast is Nelson Marwa. The regional coordinator was recently announcing a drastic move, the bombing of the expansive forest.
Yani jamaa wameingia Kenya, wameingia kwa msitu wetu wa Boni, uko ndani ya taifa letu la Kenya. Wanatoka hapo ndani wanapiga watu wetu, halafu wanarudi kulala tu kukula ndani ya msitu wa Boni, na it's inside Kenya. I mean, I can't understand this myself. I think we need to bomb that forest completely. We need to deal with that forest and deal with these criminals.
Violent extremism and radicalization feeds into terror, and although a thorny subject, media focus seems to be whittling down, partly blamed on the raging debate now in media circles on the balance between nationalism and national security.
Vijana wanachukuliwa sababu hawana ajira, unaona, na hawana pia, akicheki hivi hawana pesa, akicheki hivi familia yao imesota. So hata mtu kama mimi naweza kujiingiza sababu kicheki hivi ni pesa.
Sasa hii kama sasa free time, hakuna kazi, hakuna watalii. Inabidi sasa tunapoteza time na kucheza mpira. So kwa hivyo hata kama ni serikali ingeangalia upande wa utalii, hayo mambo ya utalii ndio wao utusaidia sisi sana.
Tuomba viongozi wako juu watusaidie na sisi vijana kututoa mahali kama hapa. Maana vijana wengi hapa wanatoka mtaani wanakuja kutafuta riski hapa, wanakuja kucheza mipira hapa.
Some say the amnesty window for returnees of Somalia made some ground, but they lacked a framework to incorporate the returnees.
At one time we were talking about the amnesty that the government provided. You need to know, and it needs to be remembered, that the government has taken pretty long to develop the amnesty rehabilitation and integration framework, which would have then provided for how to deal with the returnees and the options that are available within the security sector.
Serikali wanasema tu, mimi naweza sema ni PR kuwa kuna amnesty, lakini hatuoni matokeo yake. Ingawa hivi tunafanya kazi na serikali kusaidia jamii na masuala haya, lakini changamoto bado iko, na kwa sasa ninavyoongea watu kupotezwa kiolela iko, ama watu kupotea kiolela bado iko. Maana yake niko na records, watu kuuawa kiolela bado iko. Na lakini hivi sasa Kenya watu wamesahau, waandishi wa habari pia hawaangazii masuala haya.
Couple of days ago, the attack at St. Paul's ACK Church Ukunda reviving fresh discussions. 2 AP officers died after gunmen riding on a motorbike shot them as they were manning the church. Early 2016, in a landmark judgment, Samuel Wanjala Wabwire was condemned to 2 decades behind bars. He was convicted of promoting radical extremism among children in Kilifi in contravention of the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2012. What could be Kenya's first conviction for a hate crime fueled by religious extremism. Some human rights organizations say they are receiving yet again more and more cases of disappearance, and this is raising fears that the fight is far from over. Even as security organs say it's time to rethink the Boni strategy, the fight against terror at the Kenyan coast has proved to be a sticky affair altogether, and now the biggest discussion being finding a true formula to handle returnees from Somalia. Francis Ontomwa, KTN News, Mombasa.
Indeed, and Francis raises some very pertinent issues in that comprehensive report. What happens to those returnees from Somalia, and how effective is it to make sure that they're reintegrated? Francis, I'm sure these are a number of questions that you will put to your guest.
Well, indeed, Yvonne, as that report has showed you that the magnitude, yes, may not measure to what we were treated to a couple of years or months ago, but it's true that indeed a lot is happening, especially in Lamu and the northern part of Lamu, especially. Things are happening. Some of them actually underreported, but it's quite a huge concern to many security people here, many human rights activists who are raising very, very serious issues regarding that particular area. But Yvonne, I will want now to engage my guest here. Of course, that report having set pace to our discussion here, and it's a familiar face in the circles of human rights activism here in the Coast region, and it's Khalid Hussein, who is a lawyer and also the executive director of Haki Africa, who will be helping us dissect some of the issues around this subject. Karibu sana wakili. Let's begin by understanding, just because it's not being reported, what exactly is happening at the moment, because disappearances were reported in many, many months ago, but this time around, we don't get to hear much about this. What is happening?
I think in the last couple of months, there's been a shift of focus, particularly with media houses. We know that the country has been in a frenzy, an election frenzy. So even though there have been issues to do with violent extremism, we haven't seen much being reported on the same. As an organization, Haki Africa has been receiving news of killings, of terror suspects. We've received information about people disappearing. And we've raised these issues, of course, but what we want to say is a few years back, the problem mainly was youth of Mombasa, youth at the coast leaving and crossing the borders to join Al-Shabaab. Right now, the main problem is the same youth now returning back to Kenya as returnees. So how do we address these issues in a manner that will enable us be able to address violent extremism and radicalization?
Yes, of course, we'll get deep into that amnesty issue, but let me get straight, first of all, to the question of Boni Forest. This is an operation that began 2 years ago, and many have been given dissecting views on whether it's succeeding or not. What's your assessment so far? Is there sincerity actually from state organs in fighting the Al-Shabaab militants who are said to be hiding in Boni Forest?
Yeah, you know, Ntomo, I just got back today from New York, where we had a series of meetings on addressing violent extremism and radicalization. And it's very clear that, you know, the West, particularly the international community led by the United Nations, are very clear that for us to win the fight against terrorism, we actually need to involve each and every member of our society. The fight against terrorism will not be won by bombings only, by shootings, by explosions and, you know, blowing things up. That cannot win us the war against terror. What we need to do is to fight terror in an intelligent manner. We need to work with the communities. We need to work with the people. Looking at the Boni issue, the first thing the government did was to ask all communities that were living in Boni Forest to leave. You know, they wanted the forest without inhabitants. But these are the same people who are supposed to help the security agencies with intelligence. So what we have is the situation getting worse because the security agencies are fighting without allies, you know, and it's a huge expansive forest. If we had the communities there, they will be able to share that information with the intelligence. So even if you look at this globally, in 2001, after the September 11 attack, we had Tony Blair, George Bush taking the world into war. At that time, we were fighting Al-Qaeda and Osama. Many years have passed of fighting and killing and all that. Now it's not just Al-Qaeda. It's ISIS, we are fighting Boko Haram, we are fighting Al-Shabaab. The situation is getting worse. And we need to understand this. At least in the international community, there has been this acceptance, and they're trying to find ways of working with communities. And I think Kenya as a country, we need to start thinking critically about the war against terror. I think government must work with communities if we are really to win this, not just in Boni, but in the whole country.
If you can stay a little on the subject of Boni Forest, we've seen state organs actually trying to change tact, trying to bring proposals here and there that this is the best way to do it. Perhaps, do you feel it's a hard nut really to crack in really trying to get answers in Boni Forest? Because some argue that a state that has all the machineries possible cannot perhaps lose a battle with the militants.
Yeah. Well, you know, Ntomwa, the fight against terrorism itself for the whole world, it's a new fight. It's not your traditional warfare where you know if you bomb this way and that way it will work. In different parts of the country, the fight against terror manifests itself differently. So you have to devise ways that are specific to your local situation. And I think as a country, as a Kenya, we have not adopted a system of working with the local communities, fighting terror intelligently, which is now what the whole world is doing, trying to bring communities closer, especially communities that are vulnerable to terrorism, communities that seem to be feeding into radicalization and all that. So I think that is a strategy that the Kenyan security agencies have so far failed to adopt, and we would strongly advise them to take that into account, because I strongly believe bombing Boni and working with local communities within Boni, between the two, the one where you bring the communities closer would be able to yield better results compared to where you are bombing, because it's 2 years, as you've said. And what are the results to be seen? Absolutely nothing. If anything, even our soldiers now are at risk. You've talked about the improvised explosive devices in your show just now. So we need to adopt ways that are more intelligent so that we can get better results.
The subject of amnesty is one that has also been dissected in so many different ways, and it touches really on the lives of people down here. The argument has been that there is no legal framework really to ensure, to guide the entire process of amnesty. How injurious do you find this, perhaps?
I think that's a very big problem, and the fact that we don't have a legal framework, we don't have a policy framework to address this particular concern is causing a lot of concern and many people to go underground. I know that the National Counterterrorism Center is working on a policy that is supposed to be adopted on the amnesty issue. I think we need to speed up this process. We need to engage other stakeholders. Haki Africa was very lucky a few months ago to work with the National Counterterrorism Center and the County Commissioner's Office and the Governor's Office in developing a policy for Mombasa County to address these issues. And we touched on the issue of amnesty. What do we do with the youth who are coming back? These are people who have killed. These are people who have engaged in warfare. And there are two issues primarily when you're looking at amnesty, two critical issues. One is the rule of law. The rule of law is very clear. You commit a crime, you have to face the law. Yeah. So when you're giving amnesty, are we saying we are now going to ignore the rule of law, that you've committed a crime and we let you go? And the second issue is the social factor. Someone who's engaged in negative or vices within the community who has caused so much harm, then we start giving him or her benefits, telling them, okay, now you stop this, we will give you businesses, we will offer you psychosocial support. What happens to the good people who've remained within the society, who are still living in poverty? How do they view that fact that I need to be bad for me to be assisted? So these two issues are very critical. We need to address these two issues and develop a policy framework that puts into account all the matters so that we can then move forward as a country.
As we wind up, let's shift gears to a whole different subject, prosecution. The last time perhaps the public can remember a case that was successfully prosecuted touching on terrorism and radicalization was some 1 or 2 years back, and it was about Samuel Wanjala Wabwire, who was slapped 20 years, and he was acquitted a few days ago. Let's begin by understanding, perhaps, as a lawyer, where does the ball drop in this one in terms of prosecuting these cases? Why are they not successfully prosecuted?
Yes, that's a very good question, and this is a question that always comes up when we are addressing matters to do with CVE. And it's very clear that the manner in which we collect evidence as a country, as security agencies, does not befit terror-related cases. Terror-related cases have become more sophisticated. Terrorists are using not just weapons of, very openly guns and things like that. So the problem with our legal framework is that the security agencies have not we'll say, metamorphosized into a more sophisticated manner of collecting evidence. That is why these terrorists have always managed to be one step ahead of us, because our security is used to a thief. He's caught red-handed with the item in his hand, or is breaking and entering, and then there's a video that captures someone doing that. If you look at terrorism nowadays, they are working, through social media, they are recruiting through social media, they are using sophisticated weapons, they are using smart bombs and things like that. So we need to equip our security agencies with more skills, but also more equipment, so that they can nab these terrorists in their act, and they can present this irrefutable evidence before a court of law. Of course, you can't expect a judge to rule without evidence. So if you don't present evidence, then they will have no choice but to acquit that person.
Thank you so much, Khalid, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Khalid Hussein there, the Executive Director of Haki Africa, and also a lawyer based here in Mombasa, giving surgery into this whole topic on fighting terror in the country. Quite a thorny and a sticky affair when it comes to down here in the coast region. And of course, it's a wide topic that we'll keep following and digging deeper into it, so that we're able to give it as many perspectives as we can. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Francis Ontoma, for that report and for speaking with Hussein Khalid from Haki Africa. We thank you for that report. And that is our time right here on the show on Checkpoint. Remember, we go all the way up until 11, and we always ensure that we have a special report from 10:30, so you don't want to miss that. I saw a couple of questions asking that. We run that exclusively here on our 24-hour news channel, KTN News, where you get the whole story. So we thank you for that, and thank you for watching and your feedback, tons of it. So I will keep going through it. We thank you for that, and thanks for engaging. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Maresha Owiti. Oh, and before I leave, tomorrow, interesting, you want to join me? It's a great tag team, myself and Sophia Wanuna. It's called A Big Story. It's at 8 o'clock. Trust me, you don't want to miss that. So I will see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Have a good night, everyone.